All right, I'll get started. Well, welcome everyone. Today I'll be speaking about an update to CAP-67, which is the Unified Events Cap. So a recent change was made where, with the goal of reaching feature parity with regards to memos in Stellar Classic, and more specifically, batch payments within a transaction with different MUX operation source accounts are possible in Classic. And this is a way you can make batch payments to an exchange. So we wanted to make similar functionality possible in Sorbonne. So the proposed solution is to add an extension function called transfer with memo to the token standard if you want to support memos. So the function takes an optional memos for both the from and to addresses and will emit a transfer event with a new topic that is a vector of memos. This format does need to be discussed, though. There's been a lot of discussion on this recently. So if we don't expect the memos to be filtered on, then it should actually be in the data field. But putting this into the data field will be a breaking change, which is why I didn't initially update the proposal for that, because the data field is currently an integer instead of a map. But one of the options is making that breaking change and updating that. And the other option is to split if you do want the memos to be filtered on, is to split that vector into two separate memo fields in the topic. So then we leave the memos in the topics and allow them to be filtered on there. And instead of those are updates to the transfer event. The other alternative is, instead of emitting the transfer event, we emit the transfer event as it exists today, and then we emit an additional transfer with memo event with the memo information. So if you care about the memo, you'd consume that event as well. And there's also an alternative proposal in the thread I just linked from Dima to first class the MUX account type, which is a different proposal from the transfer with memo, a methodology that the CAP defines. So yeah, I know there are a lot of opinions on what we should do here. I don't know if anyone wants to chime in, maybe Lee or Dima.
Yeah, I guess I could quickly present my option and recap some points I've made in the discussion regarding why do I think that my proposal might be a better option than an explicit operation called transfer with memo. And the gist of the proposal is that we make it so from the client standpoint, the MUX addresses do not do not require any special treatment, meaning that you can create an STVal that represents, for example, a MUX Classic account and passes STVal to the contract. And changes are only necessary on the contract side, similar to the transfer with memo option, right? The changes are necessary on the contract side to support this. Because if you're talking about the approach where we literally have a transfer with memo function, we're kind of reinforcing the memo concept that is really problematic, because we have two different identifiers that the users need to care about, and we put it deeper into the protocol, into the token standards, and then we just expect downstream systems to handle it in a special way to kind of represent this singular address. I am not sure if this is gonna fly. Like, if this has worked, for example, I don't see why it wouldn't changes to that, right? They constantly get issues with memos. They could, in theory, build an M address, and wallets could, in theory, parse an M address and it back into memo and G account. That doesn't happen because that's very cumbersome, and that relies on a lot of parties to do the right thing at the same time. Whereas in my proposal, the only thing that a wallet would need to do is, well, convert a string key into an address, which is like calling a library function. So there is no need to somehow specially handle this. And we are kind of reinforcing a good pattern of using max accounts. And the main benefit of max accounts is that they have a canonical single address representation, and in general, the user doesn't need to worry about what exactly it is. The only thing that they need to worry about is that this is their address of their exchange account, quote unquote, and they need to deposit money to this account. This is the only thing that they will need to worry about. So that's kind of the gist of the proposals. There are definitely implementation details that could be discussed, but I guess there was a lot of position on the whole idea of doing this, which honestly I'm still not sure I fully understand the reasons behind. Because again, like the transfer memo proposal is like doubling down on the memo hack that has been existent in the protocol for a while. So yeah, that's kind of my thought process here.
With your proposal to you have a transfer function that would take two different types, right? It could either take the address object as exists today or a must address object.
Basically, I'd say the main requirement is that on the client side, also XDR should deal with SC addresses that represent maxed accounts and introduce the concept of maxed contracts as well. That's the main requirement. Then everything else is going into the realm of the implementation details, and things may be adjusted for clarity if you think that's needed. But yeah, in my original proposal, the idea was that since the contract types are, they're like by the nature of our Sorbonne design, they're polymorphic, right? They're variant types basically, right? So you can pass a general val that represents one of the valid host types to the contract, which means that at the layer of the contract interfaces, there shouldn't be an issue for a contract to be able to accept not only address object in a function, but either an address object or a maxed address object. So this is one way this can be implemented on the level of the cross-contract interactions. There is, of course, definitely some stuff that needs to be figured out how exactly do this in the SDK, how do we represent this interface at all, but I don't think it's impossible to achieve, especially given that it's kind of a narrow use case. I think it could be a separate interface that you implement if you want to support memos. And this interface will be compatible with the interface of the original token contract, because again, protocol itself does not enforce any type restrictions. Type restrictions happen at the contract implementation layer. So I think, we can do that. And the same goes for the events, right? We can do different things about the events. Like we can, as a transfer event, we can like the option I'm kind of in favor of, which is another benefit of this approach, is that since we have maxed accounts in the protocol, what we could do is we could have an additional field in the event structure itself for storing these maxed IDs. I don't know if it is too wasteful or not, but at least this is an option that we have that does not require immediate additional events and also does not mess up indexing for those who don't care about memos. So you could have a side vector of the multiplexed IDs, the addresses in the event, which we generate automatically. So yeah, that's kind of one of the options that this opens up as well.
So the event point you mentioned, like that can be done with either approach, right? where we separate the mux ID?
Well, it depends on where this goes. In the transfer is memo option, it has to go through the normal event data structure. So it will either belong to data or topics. With the protocol-based approach, we have an option of putting it into a sort field that is not data and not a topic.
Oh, you mean in the XDR?
Yeah, in the XDR, okay. Yes. So if you don't care about this, you will not see it at all, and this event will look like a normal transfer event to you.
Interesting. Okay, so that would require some downstream, like some work in RPC to expose that additional information, right? Because I don't think RPC currently exposes everything.
Of course. I mean, sure. Any option requires like some sort of additional work somewhere. And yeah, so it's not an argument pro con. It's not a pro con of any approach. Yeah. Sorry, I was talking about Lee wanted to say something.
Yeah, so I think like we're discussing a few different small features that all come together into sort of these two different ways that we could implement this. And so I think the four different features we're talking about is, should it be an M address, or should it be a G address plus a memo in the input? And then the same thing for the output, the event. And then we're talking about, should we reuse the transfer function, the existing transfer function, or should we separate this use of mux or memos into a separate function? And then should we reuse the transfer event, or should we separate them into the transfer with memo event? Like each of these things are like separate decisions that we can make. I think some of what you've alluded to, Dima, about the SDK, and what would this look like in the SDK. So I understand. I think when we look at from the host interface, yes, all values that come into a contract are a val. So it's a little bit like if you're a Java programmer and you're familiar with like object, you can make your parameter coming into a function as object, or you can make it some type and map to different types. So, we could add an SDK type that is, I'm not sure what we'd call it, any address. I'm just going to use the term any address right now. And any address could be this mux address, or it could be the address we have today. So the mux address is an M address, and the address we have today is a G or a C. And so we could do that, but we're sort of adding a lot more that I think every token developer is going to be exposed to and going to have to learn about. And that's a barrier to entry. That's a potential point of confusion. So why I think that every token developer will be exposed to this is because we can't have that token interface be something that's extendable. So like right now the SDK has, if the function name is the same. So right now there's this token interface in the Soroban SDK, and there's tooling being built around that by folks like, if you go and have a look at like the Open Zeppelin contracts and stuff. So there's like tooling being built up around being compatible with that. And we can't have like another trait that provides a different type of transfer function that has the same name and has a different type as the input. So that means that somebody that goes and implements, one of those traits, their code might not be compatible with someone who implements the other type of the trait. If we have two complete different traits, it's very difficult. It's not really simple in Rust to, Rust doesn't have this concept of like overloading functions. So it's a little bit difficult to figure out how do we actually make that work. So I think like a narrative around like what a developer experiences. So like on the surface, I think like, this, trying to build everything into one function, overloading the type. These are all nice engineering these all seem like nice engineering decisions, but the narrative that it actually results in for the user of the SDK is reasonably complicated. Like they need to learn about more things. Whereas most custom token developers probably don't need to know about MUX addresses. They probably don't need to know about any address. They probably don't need to know about memos. Like a lot of what we're adding for like MUX address and memos is for, I guess some specific use cases where the token developers for those specific use cases would need to be aware of them.
I've made a lot of, I've answered a lot of these questions in the discussion, but yeah, I can answer again. And I'd really like to challenge a lot of your points because, well, first thing is the developer complexity. I think that transfer with memo option introduces developer complexity, arguably more developer complexity, just in different place. And this place is stuff like wallets or block explorers. And I would argue that complexity in these places is much worse because instead of, doing this once or a few times in places like OpenZeppelin implementations, for example, right? You actually ask every developer to either resort to just presenting this transfer with memo operation as literally transfer with memo, and we kind of just repeat the mistake of building memo into protocol, and we'll have funds lost because people just forget to paste memo in the operation. Or you have a requirement for the downstream developers to have the same level of knowledge of what memos do, but the workaround, again, if we, like in case of the SDK, if there is at least some possible way of building a sane solution for the developers, which we can discuss as brainstorm options. For the downstream, it's basically up to them for the interpretation, and I don't see a sane way of standardizing this and making sure that, every time address is an address, but if you encounter a transfer with memo somewhere, then this is not an address, this is a MUX address. And then if you encounter an M address when a user tries to make a transfer, you actually need to resort to this different function and you need to break it down. I think it's complicated. I think it's more complicated than messing a bit with Rust traits. And the solutions that are possible involve, like, what if token interface accepted just a val, for example, which is less type safe, but token implementation just makes a check if it is address in one case or MUX address in the other case. Then we don't even need separate traits, so it just moves the check out of SDK automagical type conversion into the contract logic. That's just one option we can think about more. My point is that I feel like fundamentally this is just a better place to put complexity in, because it's higher upstream and ultimately not many people need to deal with it, especially if it's always once in something like OpenZeppelin implementations. But also, sorry, one last thing I wanted, one last point I wanted to make. I don't agree that most of the token developers should not care about memos. I think they do because they probably would hope their tokens being listed on the exchanges at some point, sooner or later. So I think in either option, they will kind of need to worry about this in one way or another, either by implementing transfer with memo or MUX account support. So yeah, again, I'm not sure if we are saving something here specifically.
Yeah. So I think one thing I think was interesting, you talked about the this idea that we want to be able to encourage M address use, and we don't want to go down that past where the two were separated because that was a mistake. It was easy to forget them. I think we're conflating some of the layers here. So when M addresses were added, there were actually two problems to solve. So the first problem was people not forgetting the memo and displaying that information. So displaying that combined information in just a single identifier that they could just copy and paste in the wallet. Now, the second problem that had to be solved was how do we get that information into the existing transaction XDR? The way that we settled on solving that second piece is actually largely an implementation decision. So that first piece was like the actual problem, the problem we were trying to solve, the user problem. The second piece was the implementation, is just implementation details. Now, the way we tried to solve that at the time, which was largely led by just the existing structure of the XDR, was to put that memo ID next to the account inside this muxed account structure, because we could actually do that in a way that didn't break a lot of the existing XDR. But the goal was really just to get the memo alongside each of these places where we needed to basically, attach it to a destination or attach it to the source. So I think like that last part is largely an implementation decision. The problem that was originally solved with Mux accounts is that first part, user copying and pasting a single ID into their wallet. And I don't like both of the solutions we're discussing here, they both satisfy that first problem, which I think is like, if we're going to continue to support Mux accounts, that's sort of the thing we have to make sure that continues to get solved. And otherwise, like a lot of those details about, does the wallet split apart the M address? Wallets already need to know about M addresses, so like that's not a big deal. They can potentially, we can make the SDK easier at doing that for them. But that's largely an implementation detail. So I guess I'm not really seeing like the connect with like how adding. Continuing to propagate passing those, because I mean in the XDR, like to be really clear, like in the XDR, an M address is still two parts. The memo is still separated from the public key.
Sure, totally. But the thing is that again, this transfer of this memo, we have like two separate contract call arguments, and yeah, of course it is an implementation detail, but this is the details that will cause a lot of bad decisions downstream. Again, I would argue that.
So what are those bad decisions? Can we talk specifically? About what those bad decisions are? Because I just want to highlight is that downstream systems will want to filter these events by the G address, not by the.
No. I'm not talking about the events. I'm talking about the calls. And again, to make my point clear, I'm not even insisting on any specific solution to the events. I'm talking specifically about how is this function being called. I'm arguing that transfer as memo is harmful because, well, you have a function that has 4 arguments, and downstream, when you're building this call and trying to get user input for it, you basically have 2 options. One option is do what you do every other time for every other function, which is have a strict mapping of SC-vals to the input function arguments. What we are proposing here with transfer as memos is that, well, in this particular case, they will need to somehow either take M address as user input and split it into 2 parts, or I don't know. I'm not really sure how this is supposed to look like. And then when we are talking about auth, which again kind of deals with the function arguments, we're in exactly the same position where we kind of need to, in this particular case, we need to do something about this mapping of arguments that is normally 1-to-1. And your code would be, hey, if I say SC address, render is a string key. But here we say, no, you cannot render this as a string key. You actually need to render first and second argument as this M string key. So, I doubt this will work. And this is honestly how, again, I've made this point before, we can say that transaction memo is an implementation detail, just renders destination as an M address of memo plus a destination account. That works on paper if you have a single payment. But people don't do that because it's like very unintuitive and error prone.
Hey, Lee, you there?
Yep. I don't know if George would like to. George is typing some things in here. It sounds like he has some perspective to share. Well, don't know if he wants to join the stage.
Sure, yeah, I mean, I can just reiterate what I put in the chat, which is pretty similar to Dima's points, I think, which is that having separate functions for this and separate parameters for this just reintroduces the problem at the user layer that you mentioned, Lee, which is that people forget their memos, right? So by separating it out, you're just reintroducing that possible confusion. It seems to me that if we want first-class support for custodial wallets, which is like the main user of M addresses, then you would want first-class support in transfers, right? And you would want that to also be present in custom tokens. If a token doesn't support M addresses, right, then you can't use it in the exchanges, which might be fine and might be a decision that the token makes. But I feel like we would want to encourage that rather than make it this very distinct opt-in thing that you have to have a separate function to handle.
You mentioned that people will forget the memo, but if an exchange is still displaying an M address and the wallet is receiving that M address, I mean, if the wallet doesn't know what to do with an M address, it's going to fail. There's going to be some sort of error. But if a wallet knows what to do with an M address, it's going to unpack it. So I'm trying to figure out where is the forgetting the memo piece coming in?
You're suggesting we would continue to use the M string key, but not actually propagate that at anything but the UI layer.
Correct. That's the layer, that's like the input into creating a transaction. That's the layer where the M address came about to solve the problem.
I see. And so the application developer would be responsible for dissecting the M address rather than just passing it along.
Yep. Now that's not without a cost, I acknowledge, but I think the cost, like this is we're discussing trade-offs.
Yeah, and the cost in the solution I'm proposing is just using a new version of string key library, because again, it just maps into a C address. But arguably, things are a bit more complex on the contract side, which, I'm not sure if that's necessarily significantly more complex.
Could you elaborate on what you mean by an M address maps to a C address?
SC address, sorry, SC. So basically
SC.
because what I'm proposing, I want wallet to just do what they are likely doing now, right? It would paste the destination as a string key, and you can just take this string key, convert it into a C address, SC val, pass it to the call. And this is this is what you have to do now to support Sorbonne transfers, right? And the only thing you will need to do to support max transfers is update the libraries. Things will magically work. It's just a lot less work and a lot less chances of just doing something weird.
Yeah, what typically happens in, I think, most SDKs. George, you can probably correct me if I'm wrong about this, or if it's not most, but I think what most SDKs do is you give them a string. So you give them the M address or the G address, and then the SDK is the one that builds the MUX account on the classic side, or whatever the XDR types are. So most applications don't build the XDR types themselves, but...
Right, that's the point, right? But they, do we make contract calls with just strings? And even then, you still need to know which contract call to make, right? Because your safe default should probably be transfer, but then, or maybe the safe default should be transfer with memo, but that's not always going to succeed. So there is definitely some layer of logic that needs to happen, even SDK build calls just from the strings. But I'm not even sure if that's the case, right? Because conversion and building the actual call is different. And here, we are mixing the conversion and building the call, because currently, again, for each and every contract call, the conversion is one-to-one. You have two string keys and an amount, and this is the argument to the transfer. And here we say, well, here is two string keys and amount, but you need to map this to 4 arguments and ensure at which layers it should happen. This is somehow encapsulated in the SDK, or should always care about it, or whatever client. So I don't know. Maybe there is some good solutions there, but I feel like it's kind of hacky and error prone. And then again, as I pointed in the discussion, block explorers make display this differently as well. So if you were to check your transactions there, you would be confused. Yeah.
So I think where these different ideas we're optimizing for different things. So I think the proposal for transfer with memo is very simple to add to the SDK, and the experience or the knowledge about what you need to know about that extension of a token is really isolated. And so I think there are benefits to developer onboarding for contract development in the Stellar ecosystem because of that. And then I think that the idea that you're presenting is optimizing for there being one interface, a single interface. People need to learn, so people need to know about this stuff, so there's more for them to maybe know up front as a contract developer. But once they know that information, it's a single interface. And then an added benefit of this is that in things like SDKs or at that client level, you do still get that single view of the M address, whereas with the first proposal, we don't. You don't get the single view because clients need to unpack things. So I think these two different approaches are optimizing for different things, trading off different things. I think something that you mentioned before, Dima, is that we haven't really figured out exactly what the SDK would look like and what the experience would be there. Maybe we need to, assuming that we have all the time in the world, maybe we need to actually do a spike there to make sure that we don't have any unknowns and that we have a clear vision for what the contract developer experience is going to be.
Yeah, sure, I agree that prototype wouldn't hurt. Because I wanted to make sure this makes sense otherwise.
I think maybe we could discuss the event portion of this. So earlier I listed out there were 4 micro decisions we sort of need to make within these decisions. And one of those decisions, or 2 of those decisions, is around the event. So I think we've talked quite a lot about the input, the transfer function versus the transfer memo function. And then, should it be G memo and M on the inputs? For the outputs, I don't think I saw in your proposal that they would be an M address. So are both proposals consistent that whatever the event is, the event would contain a G and then a separate memo?
Yeah, for the events, I don't have a strong opinion. I have options. And the trade-offs there are like much less clear to me because, well, we could easily put M addresses right there in the event, and the event would look the same. But the concern is that it will confuse consumers that don't care about M addresses, right? Which is why we could do either separate field that is protocol defined for these memos, which has again a downside of, well, it's a protocol change, and also it adds like 4 bytes to all the events, which is kind of bad. But of course, we can just do whatever we would do with transfer with memo, by just providing ways of getting the mark ready from the event, and then you can do basically anything you want with the event structure. And I think there is no difference between transfer with memo and my proposal. This scenario, like if we allow users to split max address into 2 parts, then we can standardize whatever events we think are the best trade-off. Yeah, the only distinctive thing about my proposal is that we have this yet another option of having memos standardized as a parallel field to topics and data. But other than that, yeah, I don't have too strong opinion on what the event should look like.
Yeah, Tom is not here today, but I did run this by him yesterday, like what, based off what he knows from a product perspective, would it make more sense for exchanges to, filter on, or exchanges or anchors to filter on that M versus a G address? His opinion was a G address. I think I don't think we have like a survey of how people typically filter, but existing exchanges would be, given that historically there were just a separate G and a memo, are probably filtering on G address.
Oh yeah, totally. I kind of like we know status quo that most exchanges use G plus memo, but they also don't use the events, which is what we're discussing here. So there may be honestly an opportunity here, like to kind of, if people need to migrate anyway, you can kind of try to promote something a bit better. But I think for non-exchanges, memos may be kind of annoying to deal with. So
right, but exchanges would be using Horizon, and Horizon typically emits in air quotes things based on account. So I think that's where like the idea that, okay, like exchanges, they currently collect these events, affects payments via account. So we should probably just keep doing the same thing and emit events by account, which I think makes sense because like these topics are intended to be things that you could filter on. And so if I'm running a system that's catering for n number of events coming in to one G address, but across like all those n number of muxed IDs, like it from a scaling perspective, it's difficult to, how would you use an RPC to filter on all of those things? You'd just have your system ingesting everything relating to the G address and then splitting them out. Oh, I see Nico is on.
Yeah, so I guess you guys were talking. Yeah, there is the number 2, right? That is the. Do you want to expose the G plus memo or the M in the output, right? As an event. I think maybe we should talk first about number 4 in your list, right? That is it a single transfer event or is it multiple events? Because I think that, there are like implications in this context. Like the way I'm thinking about this is that the trade-off is that so if we have separate events, the nice thing about it is that we keep the transfer events for the standard token contract as a fairly clean, like it's the same thing. We don't mess with it. The problem with that approach, where you have two events, is that you need to do some sort of reconciliation from the exchange side if people send. So assuming that like the exchange requires memo, but for some reason somebody sends money and forgets to specify the memo, they actually need to reconcile those two event streams in some way, basically to find the transfers that happened that don't have a transfer with memo equivalent. And that sounds a bit complicated to do. I mean, it's doable. It's just like you have to kind of do this kind of reconciliation on a per transaction basis. So like I don't know what you guys think about this one, because if we can get one event, that's the other conversation I started in discussion, right? That was I think the type of problem we have in that context is how does extensions to a standard on as an event, right? Like how do they look like? Right now, like we are saying, maybe we keep adding topics to the event. The problem I see with doing that, if we are not like super careful on that, is as you add more extensions, how does that work? Like you to keep they are basically index, right, in some arrays. So if you're only implementing one of those extensions, extension number 20, does that mean you have to put a bunch of voids, like in the up to 20 basically? That's the type of things that happens in that world. Who manages the namespace? I mean, the namespacing here being just a number, but there's a bit of that question that kind of pops up.
In this case, it probably makes sense. I think you mentioned this. It would make sense for the topics to be in the data field, not the topics. And if you turn the data into a map, then you only look for what you care about. I agree. Extending topics definitely will cause issues.
That the extensions would have their own name of sort, like maybe here we'd say memos or something, and then that's a string, and then that's how you can then have custom data attached to it.
Yeah, I think that's the cleanest option. Lee, is that what you were thinking too?
My point was just to move them out of the topics in general. I mean, I think in general the memo probably don't belong there. Like filtering on the memo IDs is getting a little too granular. Like these topics are meant to be like things that you could filter on, that most people are going to want to filter on, because I think maybe George, you can confirm this. Like I think the RPC or different systems have to index these topics. So like we've already got 4 topics. Like once you start adding more topics, it's like eek.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think the memo needs to be a topic, but
and for the same reasons that Nico is mentioning too, like having to add in all these voids. Like now we've got 6 topics, and then like you get to like 20 topics eventually when there's even more extensions. This doesn't really, it doesn't create an interface that's intuitive at all, I think. But I think this is actually one of the nice things about the separate event, the transfer of memo event, is it's very, very explicit. Like, if you want to ingest, if you're looking at an operation and there's a transfer and a transfer of memo, and you care about if you don't care about memos for starters, you just don't care about that other event. And if you do care about memos, then you can ingest that one instead for that operation.
But like I was saying though, like exchanges care about both, because they need to basically ingest those transfer with no memos, because that's basically how they can, through tech support or whatever, they can return the money to the sender.
Yeah. So for them, like there is this other issue that's I feel like this has come up like so many times, that there's this other issue that okay, now we have two events, so then they have to figure out not double processing, not double counting them, and I think we shouldn't not do this for that reason, because we should solve that problem, or we should have a story for that for how to solve that problem. It doesn't necessarily have to be solved today, but it's something we should solve. Whether that be through like, I think, we've talked about ideas like an invocation ID. And so then you just say like, okay, like this memo and this other transfer, they're in the same invocations. I don't double count the other one or something like that.
Yeah, unfortunately, I feel like invocation ID won't help here. Like there was an unrelated discussion, which is suddenly related now, about like what if a token wants to charge some fee during a transfer, for example. And you'll have an invocation is, for example, to transfer events that are actually separate transfer events. In general, I feel like if we were to come up with a good event linking mechanism, it would be almost exactly the same thing as converting data into map, like almost, because what I think we could do is say, like, for the event, we can say what is some special linking ID, and then, we can think of every event with the same linking ID as a part of the same event. But at this point, honestly, like, why don't just make data map? Because I think that's the only way really to prevent double counting. It's like to have an ambiguous way to say, like, these two events are actually describing the same thing that has happened. So maybe map is really the right way to go. Not sure.
Okay, so that's what it's. I guess we can maybe discuss it offline, or we have maybe 10 minutes left. But one of the questions to answer is: do we either use a new event or make a breaking change to the data field and make it a map? Is that right? Does that sound good?
I guess I have a question. I don't know how consumers of those things, what they do. But like, if it was an extra field at the end of the event that is added, would that really be much of a breaking change? Basically, like people are just using the index 0, whatever. Like they. I mean, it's already an array, right? So like at
the end.
Are you talking about the topic or the data?
The data.
The data isn't an array right now. It's an integer. That's the breaking change, like making.
Ooh, yeah, that's a pretty big breaking change. Yeah, I thought it was we had a vector already.
No, originally it was a map, and then I think it got changed to a vector, and then I think it got changed to an integer.
Okay, so we have that question to answer, and for the transfer with memo function versus Dima's proposal, I think what we want to do is prototype what that looks like in the SDK to see what it looks like. So that's I think that's the status of that question. That is number 3, right? Go ahead.
That's a suggestion. Yeah, I mean that's my suggestion.
No, I think it's a good idea.
My suggestion is if we're leaning towards that approach, we absolutely should spike out what the contract developer experience is, because I don't think for something that I suspect will be as intrusive to the developer experience on the contract developer side, I don't think we should trade that off for the benefit of clients not having to unpack an M address, because I think both of these things obviously have a cost. There's a cost to saying to wallet clients, you have to unpack an M address to put it into the SDK, but that's, yeah, I think I would prefer that cost over mux addresses and memos sort of intrusively entering every token implementation. But this is why to spike it, I think, to see how bad that is and to see what surprises there are. I think, one thing that came up in the chat was in the past we've been concerned about M addresses accidentally having balances stored against them. And that's one reason why we wouldn't want to add the M address to the main address type. It'd just be so easy for a developer just to store balances against the M, but then that's not accessible to use by the G address requiring auth or something. Right? I noticed that even with this proposal, that problem could still occur, if I'm understanding correctly. Like this mux address will be convertible with val so that it can be used as an input. And so in theory, you'd be able to store it as well.
Well, I mean, same can be said about transferism. Like you can do whatever sorts of stupid things in your contract. Like nothing prevents you from storing some integers in storage for no reason.
Yeah, but there's if something's going to become a thing that people shouldn't do, we shouldn't set them up to fail.
But also, yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Like, if you're concerned about this, like, you can just make it impossible to make this a key, prevent people doing themselves in a leg.
I'm not sure we can. I'm not sure we can with the existing. The way the Rust type system is. So, I mean, obviously we can do anything we want if we val type implementation.
No, we can do this at the host level. Yeah, I'm not saying it's SDK level. You can just make it fail.
But these types are just a contract type, right? Is mux address
no,
just a
contract?
It
is a cval. Like we can say, like if your ledger key a cval contains mux address, you just will not write it.
Right.
Totally doable.
So if we could do that if it's anywhere in there, like if it's inside a vec or if it's inside like a nested type or something like that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Yes, we have similar checks to what like we make sure that you cannot create a val or cval out of non-representable types and stuff like that. So we definitely have validations like that, not in the storage specifically, but we are pretty flexible in hosts in terms of like restriction types. So really, I was thinking about this as well. Like if you're concerned, which is a valid concern, like to not shoot yourself in the leg. Like you still will be able to probably extract an integer, and if you really want to, you will be able to store like this for some reason. But the same can be said about transferism, and like you need to be very intentional about doing something bad, and you can prevent the most obvious mistake, which is like just writing mux address into storage. This is preventable.
Okay, so that's question number. That was the decision number 3. We still have to figure that out.
It feels like a lot of complexity. It feels like we're discussing a lot of complexity. Just to improve that one little thing at the client.
Okay. Then for decision 2, I think we agreed that the output that event should have G plus memo, right, instead of just the M. And I guess 1 is tied to 3, right? Like the G plus memo versus M for input. So I guess that's something we still need to answer. Are there any? We're running out of time. Are there any other open questions? Sounds like we still have some stuff to discuss.
Yes, I guess the question on the single event or not, right? That's number 4. Like going back to this, right? Like this one is it could be it's a breaking change potentially, right? If it's for like the downstream, like systems, right, that are ingesting. I don't necessarily think that it's like as a breaking change like that, it's not necessarily like insurmountable, right? Like it's basically it's kind of like the type of thing you do in in many situations. We can allow, like we have to allow in the token standard that it's either a single amount or a or something else, right? And then you have to dynamically downstream then do something different based on either the type or if it's or I guess it's the type, yeah, that drives this.
Yeah, you're talking about making the data field a map, right?
If it was a map or a vector, yeah.
Yeah, we've discussed this a bit internally. There doesn't seem, it is a breaking change, but there doesn't seem to be much opposition to this. But we can bring this back up if it helps in this case. Yeah.
I think too, like the way we would do this, if this memo thing is a separate SEP and an extension, we'd make a change to SEP 41 as well as the extension. So like SEP 41, ideally we'd change SEP 41 so that it says that the field could be an amount or a map that contains an amount.
Yeah.
So that if folks are developing, they don't feel like they need to use just the amount for non-memo transfers.
Yeah, amount as an integer field definitely has to be a part of the standard. We cannot deprecate it because the historical events have it already.
Yeah. Yeah, wouldn't remove it. We'd just say that both are.
Yeah.
All right, we're out of time. So unless are there any other questions or concerns right now? You can continue adding them to the chat, and we can address them, and we'll continue any open questions in the GitHub discussions. All right, thank you.